we're going to take a deep dive on a well-structured, irrevocable trust with a sound trustee and good trust document in place.
The three that we're going to cover today are a little bit more complex, all set up for different reasons. The one we're going to cover today is a charitable remainder trust.
Someone that's very charitably inclined wants to leave a legacy to charity and be as tax efficient as possible. However, they still want an income stream from this asset to help support them while they're living.
GSTs, so generation skipping trust. And these are primarily for grandchildren. If you don't set this up, it gets taxed at 40% of them. It goes to the adult children's estate. It gets taxed 40% again, almost cutting your wealth in half. GST would either be provisioned in some of those trusts or it could be a separate trust by itself. Intentionally Defective Grantor Trust. And this one's really unique one, especially for a business owner. You ultimately want your business to go to your kids and you want them to avoid paying this big hit of estate tax.
Benefit is you're using money that's inside of your estate to pay that tax to get more money into the trust that's outside of your estate.
We want to get so intimately in the know of your goals, your family, your situation, and educate you on how these work. We believe clients need to understand. If you don't,
we're in the process in America of seeing the greatest wealth transfer that has ever occurred between generations. And statistically speaking, 70% of wealth is gone by the first generation and over 90% of wealth is gone by the second generation. So those are big problems. And one of the ways to solve for that is to have a well-structured, irrevocable trust with a sound trustee and good trust document in place. And we're going to take a deep dive onto different structures on how to not be one of those statistics.
There's lots of complex, irrevocable trust. We did a podcast prior to this one. We hit special needs trust. We hit Q-tips. If you're on your second marriage and want to preserve wealth for, your second spouse and also, kids from a prior marriage, it's a perfect one. And then we also hit irrevocable life insurance trust. And today we're going to take a step further into detail. I would say the three that we're going to cover today are a little bit more complex, all set up for different reasons. So the approach that we take is making sure that when clients set up these trusts, their intentions, their values, their goals are first, and the trust is just supporting that. We see a lot of times these are sold because of huge tax savings, but we totally miss that, the goal is totally missed, like financial security right now while I'm living. If we put too much in a trust too quickly, you could sacrifice your financial independence today. So it's all a balancing act. It's an artwork. The first one let's cover today is is around charitable. So there's several types of charitable trust, but the one we're going to cover today is a charitable remainder trust. It's one of the most common and most powerful. So, let's go through, a couple examples. Jamison, do you want to give an example first?
Yeah, I'll just give a high-level overview of how this works. So basically, you gift money into a trust, ideally an appreciated asset. I'm going to try to avoid all of the technicalities. High level, you get a deduction when it goes in. That trust then, you don't pay taxes if it's appreciated. If it's an appreciated asset, you get the tax deduction. You have to take an income stream out for your life as the grantor. There's a calculation that's roughly 5%. And then the benefit is as that asset grows, at death, then no taxes are paid and it goes to a charity. So that's high level overview. I would say a specific use case is someone that's very charitably inclined, wants to leave a legacy to charity and be as tax efficient as possible. However, they still want an income stream from this asset to help support them while they're living. And the best use case, if you have a really highly appreciated asset, that could be a real estate sale or a real estate holding. That could be appreciated securities. Could be whatever asset you want. You put it in there, get a tax deduction, capital gains tax are avoided, and you get an income stream from it.
No doubt. Okay, so let me go through an example of numbers, right? So let's just say that someone bought a property, and this property was bought in the right spot, and the cost basis is essentially zero because they've depreciated it, they've deducted it, they were real estate professionals, whatever the case may be. It's now worth $4 million. So if they sell this thing, approximately they're going to owe about $1 million in taxes, capital gain taxes. They've held it over a year. It's obviously they've held it for like 30 years. So if they sell this $4 million asset, they get $4 million, but ultimately $1 million goes right to the IRS, right to tax. They keep $3 million. Now, what are they going to do with $3 million? They're retired. They're going to take income out of this, safe withdrawal rate, maybe, 120 to 150,000 a year. So we'll just call it like 10 to 12,000 a month net of tax. They're able to live off it for life. Now, what happens if they die? Let's say they don't have kids. It's going to go to charity. Much better route, if that's the goal, if they want to avoid tax, later and now, is they would put the property into the Charitable Remainder Trust. So now all $4 million would end up staying in the Charitable Remainder Trust. So that's benefit one, is they don't have to pay that capital gain tax, right? They just saved $1 million. Benefit number two, they got a tax deduction on the $4 million. So if they were at the highest tax bracket, so if out of the $4 million, all $4 million stays, they save that $1 million of capital gain tax. So right away, that's worth the price of admission. On top of that, they get up a deduction that year up to 30% of AGI. Now it's 60% of AGI if it's cash, it's 30% of AGI if it's an asset, but they can spread that out. So if their AGI is $1 million, they take 300,000 of that gift and they're deduct it right off their tax. If they're doing a Roth conversion that year, or if they're stepping up basis in another stock, we can make that tax neutral for them, or even get money back in their pockets. Now, once the money's in the CRT, Charitable Remainder Trust, they get to take an income stream off of that. So they assign an interest rate. Let's just say it's 5%, making that up. So 4 million, 5%, it's 200 grand a year. So now they get to take 200 grand a year out of the trust, and they get to live off of that. Once they die, the $4 million have to go to the charity that they've decided of their choice. That's basic structure, but you can see huge tax power, tax benefits. The downside here is obviously if they put the $4 million here, they can't take the $4 million out. They've given up the control of the principal. They can take the interest only while they're living.
I think the best use case would be if you have a big income year. Let's say you sell a business, that 30% number is going to be off of a bigger number. So that is when, if you take advantage of it in a very high income year, obviously you could spread it out going forward. But if most of your income that year is at 37%, that'd be a really good year to do it.
And particularly if you've held the property for a really long time, the lower the basis, that's the higher the capital gains that you'd be avoiding by putting it in the CRT.
That's a great example, Ben. So if you buy a property for $4 and sold it for $4, you'd still get the income tax deduction, 30% of the your AGI, but you wouldn't be avoiding that $1 million capital gain tax. So the lower the basis, if you have an old stock, an old property, etc., the better. So this is obviously would only be appropriate for someone very charitably inclined. If you're not planning on giving the money to charity either now or when you die, and someone's trying to sell you the Charitable Remainder Trust, not appropriate. We don't want to lead, whatever the saying is, the cart before the horse.
Don't let the tax tail wag the dog, or something along those lines.
You made that up. We're going to put a Ben Ruttenberg next to that quote.
And okay. I have seen these sold for ridiculous reasons.
Yes.
But this goes back to what you said. If someone is not charitably inclined, or someone is not, the purpose of this is not to avoid a maximum tax deduction, then there's no reason for you to be doing this.
No question. But if you're going to hide net worth, some of your money's going to go to charity anyways. A lot of people just wait and then end up wasting a lot of taxes while they're living and when they die. This would obviously be a good fit if you're worth, $20 million and you're like, well, half my money's going to charity. Yeah, Charitable Remainder Trust would make sense to cover some of your baseline income and get your cake and eat it too, essentially. Okay, let's talk about GSTs. So generation skipping trust. And these are primarily for, the purposes would be for grandchildren. So, James, do you want to give us an example again?
Yeah. One example, we have a client and grown adult child. The parents are worth about $10 million. They're probably going to be under the exemption unless that drops. However, the adult kid owns a very successful business that is worth like $25 million. He's making a ton of money on cash flow. He's in his 30s. He's almost certainly going to be over the exemption. So use case for this that we did was the parents set up a GST. So when they died, they use their credit. Money goes into the generation skipping trust. And the benefit is it never hits the child's estate for estate tax purposes. So if you don't do that, assets go to the kid. It gets taxed at their level when they die, but in this case, it goes to the trust. The child has enough assets that he's going to be good for the rest of his life. Now this avoids that 40% tax and is used for the benefit of the kids.
and they get the adult children still get to use the income for their life.
That's right.
They just don't touch the principal, and the principal, instead of potentially, if let's say the grand parents were above the limit, and you're just using an example of like if you don't set this up, it gets taxed to 40% of them. It goes to the adult children's estate. It gets taxed 40% again. So that's just how you erode, like almost cutting your wealth in half, cut it in half again. This avoids all that if you set this up, especially early on, as it goes tax free. We avoid, getting it into their estate, then it goes tax free to the grandkids, and you get your cake and eat it too, because the adult children, if they're already set, they're not going to need the principal. If this is $10 million, the interest, if it's $400,000 or $500,000 a year, that's plenty to supplement their wealth. And then, the grandkids get the principal plus whatever interest wasn't used and was reinvested instead.
Plus, the adult child can still be the trustee on the trust that's for the benefit of the grandkids. So you still want the adult child to be involved, helping oversee distribution requests, making sure that the money is protected from divorce and from lawsuits, all the benefits of why you have money in a trust in the first place. The adult child can still be involved as a trustee, but they're, as Jamison said, it's avoiding a lot of it's kind of missing their estate back down to the grandkids.
No question. Well, anything else to add on the GSTs? I think these are often we see this is for a high net worth person. You want to have different types of trust. Typically, you'd have a revocable trust. Maybe you'd have 2 spousal life access trust. Maybe you have a life insurance trust that holds like a second to die. And if you have a lot of wealth, then this GST would either be, provisioned in some of those trusts, or it could be a separate trust by itself for that purpose.
If you have parents that aren't going to be subject to the estate tax and the kids will, easiest use case, use their exemption, get a bunch of money in there. If both parents and kids are going to be subject to the tax, low-hanging fruit is gift the $19,000 a year for however many beneficiaries they are every year, get that in, and then that way it's not going to hit either credit.
So the last one we're going to talk about is an intentionally defective grantor trust. And this one is really a unique one especially for a business owner. We see it's most common where you have this asset that is going to be big. You still want to control it ultimately. You still want to pay some of the taxes on the trust, but you ultimately want your business to go to your kids, and you want them to avoid paying this big hit of estate tax. So the IDGT is a way to get it in, still control it, get paid still while you're operating it, but then also all this appreciation that's going to occur is going to be out of your estate. So let's go through an actual example. So Jamison, should we say someone's like 40 years old, and let's say the business is worth, $5 million, and you've got the goal, want to avoid this estate tax when you die, and you ultimately want your kids to inherit it, as tax efficiently as possible and continue to run it. So let's just go step by step.
Okay. So as I say, so if you didn't do this and you gifted the business into a trust, you're going to use part of your credit of $15 million. What the benefit of this is, you do not use part of your credit because it's a sale. So $5 million asset, you sell it to the trust. That business is profitable, hopefully. So the business is sold to the trust with a promissory note. Let's say, for example, he's going to continue to operate and run the business for a long time. He's 40. So he structures the note for 20 years. So it's going to pay him back $350,000 a year for 20 years. At the end of those 20 years, he's taken that income. It's now on his balance sheet. It's inside of his estate. But the business, let's say it goes from 10 or 5 to 15 million, is now owned by that trust, and it is not subject to any estate taxes because it's protected by the trust.
So I'm gonna hit 2 things, Rhoda, just so people are following the math. So you sold $5 million. Why are you getting $350 for 20 years? Well, because that's $350 times 20 years is $7 million. Well, when you do a promissory note, the IRS, I would say you actually have to use what's called an AFR rate. So if you use an AFR rate, there's an interest rate right now. Long term is probably like 3 to 4%, and so cheaper than a mortgage, because this is a promissory note. AFR rates typically, if you're dealing with family, or friends. So that is a good thing because you get to get that cash flow out of your business, which you would anyways through a salary, that $350 a year. And now, as you gave the example, we haven't used the exemption. The $5 million goes to 15, or let's say the $5 million goes to 50 million. when you pass it off to your kids, one, they already own the business. They can have the trust already owns the business, and all of that appreciation, including the initial, is out of your estate. So you're going to avoid ultimately that 40% hit when you pass it.
And the big thing is because it's a grantor trust, intentionally defective grantor trust, when that sale occurs, and this would have to be the use case is you'd be pretty high net worth, because the big benefit is that trust does not pay taxes on that sale. The grantor does. So the benefit is let's say it sells for $15 million, your tax capital gains. Let's say it's $4 or $5 million in taxes.
Yeah.
If the grantor pays those taxes at the time of the sale, that entire $15 million balance gets paid into the trust. So benefit is you're using money that's inside of your estate to pay that tax to get more money into the trust that's outside of your estate. So you obviously have to make sure you have other assets to support your lifestyle when you're doing that. You don't just funnel everything into the trust and have nothing to live off of. But the big benefit is that the grantor is paying the taxes.
Yeah. So in the defective, just to income tax, IRS is looking at the trust as if it's still you. Estate tax, they're looking at the trust as if it's not you, where you save that 40%. So you truly do get to have your cake and eat it too, or whatever the saying is. So yeah, this will be a great example for, a young business owner that's blowing it up. And also we've seen it work for a mature business owner, someone that, a 60-year-old that is not sure if they want to pass money on to their kids through the business, or if their kids are going to come in. But you can start this, and like you gave an example, if the business sells, it goes into the trust. And sometimes we'll see that clients will use part of, because right now the gifting limits are $15 million each. So sometimes you'll use, if your business is worth $100 million, for example, sometimes you use $10 million, get 10% of it in there, and then do the rest of it through the promissory note. So you can do. You could use all of your exemption to seed this. You could use none of your exemption to seed this. It just depends on how cash flow wise the business can support paying that note off.
And one thing I hear when we talk about this is that the business doesn't want to give up control if the trust owns it and the trustee is in control. Way around that is, depending on the structure of your entity, split the share classes into voting and non-voting shares, and then that owner retains all of the voting shares, but the rest of the business goes into the trust. Now the trust gets the financial benefit, and that owner still has full control over the business.
No doubt. So you could keep one voting share, you own that, and then 99% of it, or the example, goes into the trust through the IDGT sale.
A question that people might be thinking about when considering an intentionally defective grantor trust: what if they are not sure if their kids are going to succeed them in the business? Does this strategy, if you're in their shoes, does that still make sense if you're not 100% sure if the kids are going to take over or not?
It could. It definitely could, depending on how long of a runway that you have. And if your business still gets sold, like Jamison mentioned, it's still going to go into the trust. Now the math could work out. Why wouldn't we just put this into a SLAT or a different type of irrevocable trust? I think with IDGT gives, if you're still operating, it gives you that cash flow back, because most of the time, if you put put interest into a SLAT, now you're losing cash flow. Like that SLAT, if it owns 10% of your business, if you're an S corp, has to get 10% of every distribution that's taken. Versus IDGT, you're able to sell it, and you have a guaranteed cash flow from the sale, the note payment. So it just depends on your goals, but it can make sense or not make sense, or both could make sense if you're unsure. So, Jamison, any closing thoughts?
No, I think this is a very nuanced strategy. It's got to really be the right situation, but it can be very, very effective for transferring the business to somebody else, or if it's going to sell, to save a ton of money on taxes.
Yeah, I'd say, real life example of a client that's like, not sure, my kids are graduating college, not sure if they're going to be part of the business or not. We would want to, what we often see as an attorney or CPA, or they'll blanket recommend them just because they'll see all these big tax savings. We want to get so intimately in the know of your goals, your family, your situation, and educate you on how these works, educate you on the pros and cons, educate you on if this happens, here's what this would mean for this strategy. And then typically, we believe clients need to understand. If you don't understand it, you shouldn't do it. Even if you're a trusted professional, you've got to understand the strategy, know the pros and cons, have someone that's more focused on educating you, empowering you, than trying to sell you a structure. That could come with a lot of fees as well. If you deal with the wrong, attorney or a lot of the benefits could get taken away in the fees they're charging you. So you got to look at what contract you're about to sign up for as well. So, but thanks for joining us, and we'll catch everyone next week.